I never thought I'd escape from a senior living facility at 81 years old. But that's exactly what I did, and what I discovered inside those walls will shock you. This is my story, a story about how I fought back against a system designed to warehouse the elderly, and found freedom when everyone said it was too late. My name is Clara Williamson, and at 81, I still dream in color. But 6 months ago, I was trapped in what my family called paradise, and what I came to know as a beautifully decorated prison. Let me start from the beginning, because this story needs to be told, not just for me, but for every elderly person who's been told they're too old to make their own choices. The morning everything changed. I was standing in my art studio, really just the converted garage behind my house, mixing cadmium yellow with titanium white on my palette. The painting before me was half finished, a landscape of the Colorado mountains I'd visited in my 20s. All coral sunsets and purple shadows dancing across snow-capped peaks. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but they still knew how to make magic happen on canvas. I'd been a professional artist once, not famous, not wealthy, but successful enough to make a living selling watercolors at local galleries and teaching art classes at the community college. My husband, Frank, used to joke that I painted the way other people breathed constantly and without thinking about it. "Clara," he'd say, watching me work by lamplight after dinner, "you're going to paint until the day you die, aren't you?" I always laughed and said yes, never knowing how prophetic those words would become. Frank had been gone for 5 years now, taken by cancer that ate through him faster than we could fight it. The house felt too big without his laughter echoing through the rooms. But I'd kept painting. It was the only thing that made sense in a world that had suddenly become too quiet. Every morning, I'd shuffle out to my studio with my coffee, fire up the space heater, and lose myself in color and light. That particular morning in March, I was working on the sky, trying to capture that moment just after sunrise when the clouds look like they're lit from within, when I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel driveway. Through the studio window, I saw my son Marcus approaching with his wife Linda and their teenage daughter Amy. Marcus looked uncomfortable, tugging at his tie even though it was Saturday morning. Linda clutched her designer purse like a shield. Only Amy, my 17-year-old granddaughter, met my eyes through the window and gave me a small wave. Something in their body language made my stomach clench. This wasn't a casual visit. "Morning, Mom," Marcus said when I opened the studio door. Paint fumes and the smell of turpentine wafted out into the crisp air. "Nice work." He nodded at the painting but barely glanced at it. The way people do when they're trying to be polite about something they don't understand. "It's not finished," I said, wiping cadmium yellow from my hands with an old paint-stained towel. "The light's all wrong on the left side. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "Actually, Mom, we came to talk about something important." Linda's voice had that careful, measured tone people use when they're about to deliver news they think you won't like. "Can we go inside?" My kitchen table had seen thousands of conversations over the decades. Homework sessions with Marcus when he was small, coffee dates with neighborhood friends. Late-night heart-to-hearts with Frank when we were trying to figure out how to pay for Marcus's college tuition. The yellow Formica top was chipped in places, and one of the chairs wobbled, but it had been the heart of our home for 40 years. But this conversation felt different, heavier, like something was about to break that couldn't be fixed. Marcus pulled out a manila folder thick with brochures and official-looking documents. His movements were precise, clinical, the same way he organized presentations at his accounting firm. "Mom, Linda and I have been talking. We're concerned about you living alone. The house is getting too big." The yard's becoming too much work, and frankly, he paused, exchanging a look with his wife. We worry about your safety. I bristled, my spine straightening. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. I've been doing it just fine for 5 years. Are you? Linda leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the table. Mrs. Henderson next door called us last week. She said she saw you out in the garden at midnight, painting by the porch light. In your nightgown. Heat rose in my cheeks. I had been painting that night, couldn't sleep, and the moon was so beautiful, casting silver light across my flower beds and creating shadows that begged to be captured. The cool air on my skin, the night sounds of crickets and distant traffic, the way the moonlight transformed my familiar garden into something magical. It had felt like a gift. Not a crisis. Sometimes inspiration strikes at odd hours, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Artists work when the muse calls. Marcus opened the folder with the efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. We've found a wonderful place, Mom, Sunset Manor. It's specifically designed for creative seniors. They have art studios, music rooms, even a small theater where they put on plays. You'd have your own apartment, but access to activities and care when you need it. He spread glossy brochures across my kitchen table like he was dealing cards. Smiling elderly people painted at easels, played chess in sunny atriums, worked in manicured gardens. The buildings looked like a luxury resort, all stone and glass and perfectly landscaped grounds. It looked pleasant enough, I had to admit, but also sterile. Controlled. Like a beautiful cage. This is my home, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Frank and I bought this house when you were 3 years old, Marcus. We planted every tree in that yard, painted every room ourselves. We refinished these floors on our hands and knees. My studio, you could set up a new studio there, Linda interrupted. Her tone bright and encouraging like she was talking to a child. Smaller, but you'd have everything you need. And think of all the other artists you'd meet, people your own age who understand your interests. Amy, who had been silent through this entire exchange, suddenly spoke up. Grandma. Do you want to move? Her parents shot her sharp warning looks, but she ignored them, her young face serious and determined. She had Frank's eyes, clear blue and unflinchingly direct. No, I said simply. I don't. Marcus sighed, running his hand through his thinning hair. Mom, be reasonable. You're 81 years old. What if you fall and no one finds you for days? What if you have a medical emergency? What if I live my life on my own terms until I can't anymore? I interrupted, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. What if I'd rather take that risk than spend my remaining years being managed like a child? The silence that followed was thick with tension. Amy fidgeted with her phone. Linda's lips pursed into a thin line. Marcus looked like he was fighting a headache. Finally, Linda spoke. Clara, we're not trying to control you. We're trying to protect you. Marcus loves you, and he's terrified something will happen to you out here all alone. Is that so wrong? I looked at my son, really looked at him. He was 58 now, successful. Responsible, a good father and husband. But I could see the little boy who used to sit in my studio, quietly coloring while I painted. Asking endless questions about why I mixed certain colors, or how I knew where to put the shadows. When had he stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a problem to be solved? I know you love me, I said softly. But love doesn't give you the right to make decisions about my life without asking what I want. So what do you want, Mom? Marcus asked, and for a moment. His voice cracked like it used to when he was 12 and trying not to cry. I took a deep breath. Looking around my kitchen, at the sun streaming through windows Frank had installed himself, at the herb garden visible through the glass. at the refrigerator covered with Amy's school photos and my own sketches of birds that visited the backyard feeder. I want to stay here, I said. In my home with my memories. With my work. I want to paint until my hands won't hold a brush anymore. I want to tend Frank's roses and watch the seasons change from windows I've looked through for 40 years. Is that really so unreasonable? But even as I said the words, I could see in their faces that the decision had already been made. This wasn't a discussion, it was a notification. Linda pulled out more papers from the folder. We've already put a deposit down, she said gently. The move-in date is next month, we thought. We thought it would be easier if everything was arranged. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. They'd planned this whole thing behind my back. Made choices about my future as if I was already incapable of making my own decisions. You had no right, I whispered. Mom, Marcus started. You had no right. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the linoleum. This is my house, my life, you can't just pack me up and ship me off because it makes you feel better. Amy stood too, her face pale. Dad, this isn't right. You can't force Grandma to move if she doesn't want to. Amy. Stay out of this, Linda snapped. You don't understand adult responsibilities. But Amy didn't back down. She came around the table and took my shaking hand in hers. I understand that Grandma is still a person with her own wishes. And I understand that you're treating her like she's not. Looking at my granddaughter, this fierce, beautiful girl who saw clearly what her parents had lost sight of, I felt something shift inside me. A spark of the woman I used to be. The one who'd traveled across the country alone at 25 to study with a famous watercolorist. The one who'd stood up to gallery owners who tried to lowball me. The one who'd fought beside Frank to build the life we wanted. I'll visit, I said finally, my voice steady now. I'll look at your Sunset Manor, but I'm not promising anything. Marcus visibly relaxed. That's all we ask, Mom. Just look at it with an open mind. But I was already planning. If they wanted to play games with my life, I'd play too. But I'd play to win. 3 days later, Marcus picked me up for the visit to Sunset Manor. He was chattering nervously as he drove, pointing out features of the facility from the brochure, talking about the activities and the meal plans and the levels of care available. I made appropriate sounds and nodded in the right places, but my mind was elsewhere. The facility was impressive, I had to admit. Nestled on 20 acres of manicured grounds in the wealthy suburb of Brookfield, it looked more like a high-end resort than a senior living facility. The main building was constructed of warm stone and glass, with soaring ceilings and elegant furnishings. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, and soft classical music played from hidden speakers. A woman named Jennifer Matthews, the admissions director, met us in the marble-floored lobby. She was perhaps 50. Impeccably dressed, with the kind of smile that probably worked magic on worried adult children. Mrs. Williamson, she exclaimed, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Welcome to Sunset Manor. We're so excited to show you around our community. I understand you're an artist. I paint, I said simply. Wonderful, you'll love our creative arts wing. We have a ceramics studio, a woodworking shop, and of course, our beautiful art studio with north-facing windows and all the supplies you could need. She led us on a tour that was clearly choreographed. We saw the dining room, elegant and spacious with white tablecloths and fresh orchids on every table. We visited the fitness center, the library, the game rooms, the movie theater. Everything was beautiful, clean, and clearly expensive. In the art studio, several residents worked at easels, painting still lifes of fruit bowls and flower arrangements. Their work was competent, but uninspired, the kind of safe, pretty pictures that belonged on greeting cards. A young instructor moved between them, offering gentle encouragement and minor corrections. "Do residents ever paint outdoors?" I asked. Jennifer's smile flickered slightly. "We have lovely gardens that can be viewed from the studio windows. Safety is our primary concern, of course. We can't have residents wandering the grounds unsupervised." I nodded noncommittally, but something cold settled in my stomach. We visited a model apartment, spacious and beautifully decorated, with a kitchenette, living area, bedroom, and bath. Everything was beige and cream and sage green, soothing and inoffensive and completely devoid of personality. Of course. "You can bring your own furnishings and artwork to make it feel like home," Jennifer assured me. Though I noticed the lease agreement specified that any modifications had to be approved by management. In the dining room, we sat with a resident named Margaret Phillips, a well-dressed woman about my age who'd moved in 6 months earlier. "Oh, you'll love it here," she gushed. "The staff takes such good care of us. I never have to worry about cooking or cleaning or any of those tedious chores. It's like living in a hotel. What do you do with your time?" I asked. "Well, there's bingo on Tuesdays, bridge on Thursdays, movie nights on weekends. They bring in entertainers sometimes. Last week we had a lovely young man who played the piano and sang show tunes. And the food is marvelous, though of course they monitor our diets very carefully. Dr. Peterson, our medical director, says I need to watch my sodium intake. So the kitchen prepares special low-salt meals for me. Do you ever leave the grounds?" Margaret looked puzzled. "Leave? Why would I need to leave? Everything we need is right here. Besides, transportation can be so complicated at our age. Much safer to stay put." After lunch, Jennifer showed us the medical wing, proudly explaining the 24-hour nursing care available and the direct line to the local hospital. She emphasized safety repeatedly: safety protocols, safety equipment, safety, safety. Safety, until the word lost all meaning and became just another way of saying control. As we walked back toward the lobby, I noticed things Jennifer hadn't pointed out. The discreet cameras in every hallway. The way the beautiful front doors required a key card to open from the inside. The subtle but unmistakable air of institutional life beneath all the elegant furnishings. In the parking lot, Marcus was practically glowing. "So, what did you think?" "Beautiful. Isn't it? And Jennifer says they have an opening in the independent living wing next month, so the timing is perfect." I looked back at the building. All stone and glass and manicured perfection. "It's very nice," I said carefully. "Nice? Mom, it's incredible. The level of care, the activities, the safety features. You'd never have to worry about anything again." And that, I realized, was exactly the problem. That night, I sat in my studio, staring at my half-finished mountain landscape. The painting felt more urgent now, like I was racing against time to capture something that might soon be lost. I picked up my brush and began to work on the shadows, deepening the purples and blues, adding texture to the rocky outcroppings. As I painted, I thought about Margaret Phillips and her satisfied smile, her contentment with a life that consisted of scheduled activities and monitored meals. Was that what waited for me? Days structured by other people's decisions, creativity reduced to supervised art classes, freedom traded for safety. I set down my brush and walked through my house, really seeing it for perhaps the first time in years. The living room where Frank and I had danced to old records on Saturday nights. The kitchen where I taught Marcus to make pancakes, his small hands barely able to flip them without making a mess. The bedroom where we'd whispered our dreams and fears in the dark. In Marcus's old room, now my guest room, I found photo albums I hadn't looked at in months. Pictures of Frank and me when we were young and fearless. Backpacking through Europe on a shoestring budget. Photos from my first gallery showing, me standing proudly beside my paintings, Frank beaming in the background. Images of the house when we'd first bought it, a fixer-upper that we'd slowly transformed through years of weekend projects and careful saving. This house wasn't just where I lived. It was the physical embodiment of a life fully lived, of choices made and dreams pursued and love shared. How could I explain that to Marcus, who saw only an aging structure that required maintenance he thought I couldn't handle? I made my decision that night. Sitting on the floor of Marcus's old room with photo albums spread around me like pieces of my life, I would not go quietly into supervised sunset. I would not trade my freedom for the illusion of safety, and if that meant fighting my own family, so be it. But first, I had to play along. The next morning, I called Marcus. "I've thought about it," I told him. "I'd like to move forward with Sunset Manor." The relief in his voice was palpable. "Mom." "That's wonderful. I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. I'll call Jennifer this morning and finalize the arrangements. There's just one thing," I said. "I'd like to visit a few more times before I move in. Get familiar with the place, maybe meet some more residents. Would that be possible?" "Of course. That's a great idea. I'll arrange it with Jennifer." Over the next 3 weeks, I visited Sunset Manor 5 more times. Marcus was delighted by my apparent enthusiasm, and Jennifer was happy to accommodate the prospective resident who seemed so engaged with the community. What they didn't know was that each visit was a reconnaissance mission. I learned the schedules, when staff changed shifts, when security was lightest, when residents were most closely monitored, and when they were left more to their own devices. I mapped the building layout, noting which doors required key cards and which didn't, where the cameras were positioned, and how the medical alert system worked. Most importantly, I started really talking to residents, not just the satisfied ones like Margaret whom Jennifer paraded in front of prospective families. I spoke to people in quiet corners, away from staff supervision, and gradually, a different picture of life at Sunset Manor began to emerge. There was Dorothy Hartman, a former librarian who'd been told she could bring her beloved books, but discovered that only approved titles were allowed in the community library. Nothing too depressing or controversial that might upset other residents. Her collection of poetry and classic literature had been deemed inappropriate for the community atmosphere. There was Frank Rodriguez, a retired mechanic who'd been promised workshop access, but found that residents weren't allowed to use tools that might be dangerous, which apparently included everything more complex than safety scissors. And then there was Alice Chen, a woman about my age who pulled me aside during my 4th visit with desperation in her eyes. "You seem different from the others," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no staff members were within earshot. "Are you really planning to move here?" "I'm considering it," I said carefully. Alice gripped my arm. "Don't," she whispered. "They tell you it's independent living. But it's not. They make every decision for you, what you eat, when you sleep, who you can see, where you can go. My daughter put me here 6 months ago because she thought I'd be safer." Safer from what? From living. She told me about the subtle ways residents were controlled. Medications that weren't quite necessary, but made people more compliant. Safety protocols that prevented residents from leaving the grounds without approval and an escort. Activities that were designed more to keep people occupied than to provide genuine fulfillment. I was a chemistry professor, Alice said, her voice bitter. I published research papers, I traveled internationally for conferences. Now they won't let me have access to the internet without supervision because they're afraid I might get confused by too much information. They treat us like children who can't be trusted to make our own decisions. "Have you talked to your daughter about this?" Alice laughed harshly. "I've tried. She says I'm adjusting poorly and that I need to give it more time. when I insisted I wanted to leave. They scheduled me for a psychiatric evaluation. The doctor, who sees me for 15 minutes every 3 months, declared me temporarily confused and recommended I stay for my own good. My daughter has power of attorney now. I can't leave without her permission. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. That can't be legal. It is if you sign the right papers when you move in, which everyone does because the families are told it's just for emergencies. Alice's eyes were hard now. There are a dozen people here who want to leave but can't. We're prisoners in a pretty cage, and our families think they're protecting us. That night, I called my lawyer. Eleanor Hartwell had handled Frank's and my legal affairs for 20 years. She was sharp, ethical, and most importantly, she'd known me long enough to respect my judgment. "Clara, what can I do for you?" she asked when I reached her at home. "I need to make sure my son can never have me committed or declared incompetent against my will," I said without preamble. There was a pause. "That's an unusual request. Are you having difficulties with Marcus?" I explained the situation, the pressure to move to Sunset Manor, the stories I'd heard from residents, my growing certainty that I was being maneuvered into a trap disguised as a gift. Eleanor listened without interruption, then was quiet for a long moment. "Clara, what you're describing sounds like a form of elder abuse. It may be well-intentioned, but restricting someone's freedom and autonomy without genuine necessity is still abuse. Can you help me protect myself? I can draft some documents that will make it very difficult for Marcus to override your wishes. A comprehensive advance directive, a specific power of attorney that limits his authority, and a competency statement from your doctor. But Clara, are you sure this is necessary? Marcus loves you." "I know he does," I said softly, "but sometimes love can be selfish. Sometimes people think they know what's best for you better than you do. I won't live my final years as someone else's idea of who I should be." Eleanor was quiet again. "Then, I'll have the papers ready by Friday." Moving day arrived with a gentle spring rain that made my garden look fresh and green. Marcus and Linda arrived early with a moving truck and a team of helpers. Amy came too, ostensibly to help, but mostly, I suspected, to say goodbye to the house where she'd spent so many happy hours with her grandmother and grandfather. I'd been carefully packing for weeks, but not in the way my family expected. Yes, I'd filled boxes with clothes and books and keepsakes to take to Sunset Manor, but I'd also been quietly preparing for a different kind of journey. Hidden in my studio, wrapped in old paint rags and tucked into a wooden crate that looked like it contained art supplies, were the essentials I would actually need. Cash I'd been gradually withdrawing from my bank account. Copies of all my legal documents, a prepaid cell phone, and a small bag of clothes and toiletries. The crate was labeled Clara's Art Supplies, fragile in my own handwriting, and I'd arranged for it to be delivered directly to my room at Sunset Manor by a local art supply store. As far as anyone knew, it was just my being particular about my painting materials. The morning of the move was emotional, but not in the way my family expected. They saw tears as sadness about leaving my home. In reality, I was grieving the relationship with my son, mourning the trust that had been broken when he decided he knew better than I did how I should live my remaining years. Amy helped me pack my easel and canvases, handling them with the reverence of someone who understood their importance. "Grandma," she said quietly as we wrapped a painting of the garden Frank had planted, "are you really okay with this move?" I looked at her this wise, honest girl who reminded me so much of my younger self, and made a decision. "Amy," I said, keeping my voice low, "if I ever need help, really need help, can I count on you?" She nodded without hesitation. "Always." I pressed a piece of paper into her hand, Eleanor's phone number. If anything ever seems wrong, if you can't reach me, or if someone tells you I'm not well enough for visitors, call this number. Promise me. Amy's eyes widened as she understood the implications, but she nodded solemnly. I promise. The ride to Sunset Manor felt like a funeral procession. Marcus kept up a steady stream of cheerful chatter about all the things I'd enjoy about my new home, but his voice sounded forced, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. Linda sat in the passenger seat scrolling through her phone, probably already mentally redecorating my old house for when they put it on the market. I stared out the window at the familiar streets of my neighborhood, watching them disappear behind us. Mrs. Henderson was working in her garden. She looked up and waved as we passed, not knowing she was witnessing the end of an era. Sunset Manor looked as beautiful as ever in the soft spring light, its stone facade warm and welcoming. Staff members swarmed around the moving truck with professional efficiency. And Jennifer Matthews appeared with her trademark smile and a clipboard. "Clara, welcome home," she said, as if I was checking into a luxury hotel rather than potentially trading away the last of my independence. My apartment was lovely, spacious, well-appointed, with large windows overlooking the manicured gardens. The movers arranged my furniture according to a floor plan Linda had created, transforming the space into a smaller, sanitized version of my old bedroom. My paintings looked strange on the beige walls, too vibrant and wild for the controlled environment. As evening approached and it was time for my family to leave, Amy lingered behind while her parents were busy with final paperwork. "I'm going to miss you so much," she whispered, hugging me tightly. "I'll miss you too, sweetheart. But this isn't goodbye forever." She pulled back, studying my face with those perceptive blue eyes. "You have a plan, don't you?" I smiled, remembering what it felt like to be 17 and certain that anything was possible. I always have a plan. That night, alone in my new apartment, I sat by the window and looked out at grounds that were beautiful but felt like a movie set, everything perfect and nothing real. In the distance, I could see the fence that surrounded the property, elegant wrought iron that looked decorative, but served a very specific purpose. I thought about Alice Chen, probably lying in her bed 3 floors below, staring at her own window and dreaming of freedom. I thought about Dorothy Hartman and her confiscated books, Frank Rodriguez and his forbidden tools. I thought about all the residents who'd been convinced that safety was worth any price, including their autonomy. Tomorrow, I would begin phase 2 of my plan. Tonight, I would say goodbye to Clara the compliant elderly lady and prepare to become Clara the escape artist. After all, I still had some living left to do. The first week at Sunset Manor passed in a blur of orientation sessions, medical evaluations, and carefully scheduled activities designed to help me adjust to community life. I played the part of the grateful new resident, attending art classes where we painted fruit bowls in watercolors that had been thinned to prevent messes, joining book club discussions of approved novels that wouldn't disturb anyone's sensibilities, and nodding appreciatively when Jennifer explained the medication management system that would ensure I never missed a dose or accidentally took too much. Every interaction was designed to subtly reinforce my new role as someone who needed to be cared for rather than someone capable of caring for herself. The staff spoke to residents in bright, encouraging voices usually reserved for children or pets. They praised us for small accomplishments, completing a jigsaw puzzle, eating all our vegetables, participating in sing-alongs, as if we were toddlers learning basic skills. But I was learning too, just not what they intended to teach me. I learned that the beautiful front doors were indeed locked from the inside, requiring a key card that residents weren't given. The side exits were similarly secured, and the windows in resident rooms were designed to open only a few inches, ostensibly for safety, but effectively preventing anyone from climbing out. I learned that all mail was screened by staff before being delivered to residents, and that outgoing mail required approval. Phone calls were monitored for quality assurance, and internet access was filtered and limited to approved websites, under the guise of protecting residents from scams and confusion. They'd created an information blackout that kept us isolated from the outside world. Most importantly, I learned about the daily routines and shift changes that would be crucial to my eventual escape. The night staff was minimal, one nurse on each floor, a security guard who spent most of his time watching television in the lobby, and a maintenance worker who made rounds every few hours, between midnight and 4 a.m. The facility was essentially running on autopilot, with skeleton supervision and residents assumed to be safely asleep in their beds. Dr. Peterson, the medical director Alice had mentioned, conducted his weekly rounds on Thursdays. He was a brisk, efficient man in his 50s who clearly viewed the residents as a collection of symptoms to be managed rather than individuals with their own concerns and preferences. When I mentioned that the mild sleep aid they'd prescribed was making me groggy during the day, he waved off my concerns. "That's perfectly normal, Mrs. Williamson. Your body needs time to adjust. The important thing is that you're getting proper rest. We can't have residents wandering around at night, but I've always been somewhat of a night owl. I used to do some of my best painting in the evening hours." His smile was patronizing. "I'm afraid those days are behind you now. Structure and routine are essential for cognitive health at your age. You'll find that our schedule helps you feel more settled." I nodded meekly. But mentally, I was filing away another piece of information. They wanted residents docile and predictable, and they were willing to medicate us to achieve that goal. It was during my second week that I witnessed my first real glimpse of what happened to residents who didn't adjust well to community life. His name was Walter Kowalski, a retired engineer who'd moved in a month before me. Walter was sharp as a tack, with a dry wit and an engineer's precision in everything he did. But he was also stubborn and had been increasingly vocal about his dissatisfaction with the restrictions at Sunset Manor. The breaking point came when Walter tried to leave the grounds to walk to a nearby bookstore. He'd made it as far as the front gate before security stopped him and escorted him back to the building. "I'm not a prisoner." I heard him arguing with Jennifer in the lobby. "I want to buy a book. That's not a crime." "Of course not, Mr. Kowalski," Jennifer replied smoothly. "But for your safety. All off-site trips need to be approved and arranged through our activities department. We can't have residents wandering around unaccompanied. I'm 84 years old, not 4. I think I can manage to buy a book without getting lost." Jennifer's smile never wavered. "I understand your frustration, but these policies are in place for good reasons. Why don't you check our library? I'm sure we have something you'd enjoy. Your library has nothing but romance novels and large print mysteries. I want to read about engineering innovations, current research. I want to keep my mind active." "Of course you do. That's wonderful. I'll speak with our activities director about finding some more appropriate books for you." But Walter wasn't satisfied with vague promises. Over the next few days, he became increasingly agitated, questioning policies, challenging staff decisions, and encouraging other residents to assert their own independence. He was becoming what any institutional system fears most, an organizer. The response was swift and efficient. Walter's daughter was contacted about his aggressive behavior and inability to adjust to community living. Dr. Peterson conducted an emergency evaluation and determined that Walter was experiencing agitation and possible early dementia symptoms that required immediate intervention. Within 48 hours, Walter was moved from independent living to the memory care unit, where residents had even less freedom and were more heavily medicated. When I asked about him, staff members looked concerned and sympathetic. "Mr. Kowalski is getting the specialized care he needs," a nurse told me. "Sometimes the transition to community living can be difficult for people, and their behavior changes. But don't worry, he's being well looked after." I never saw Walter again, but Alice did. She'd managed to get assigned to a cleaning detail in the memory care unit, and she reported that Walter was heavily sedated, shuffling around in a haze of pharmaceutical compliance. "He tried to tell me something," she whispered when we passed in the hallway, "but he could barely form sentences. Whatever they're giving him, it's destroyed his mind." The message was clear: conform or be medically silenced. That night, I made my final preparations. My art supply crate had arrived and was sitting innocently in the corner of my room, looking like nothing more than an old woman's attachment to her hobby. Inside, carefully hidden among tubes of paint and canvas boards, were all the tools I'd need for my escape. I'd been palming my evening medications for over a week, pretending to swallow them while actually tucking them under my tongue and disposing of them later. My mind was clear and sharp, no longer fogged by the chemical compliance they'd been forcing on me. I'd identified my escape route, a service door near the kitchen that was used by maintenance workers and delivery people. It was only lightly monitored by cameras, and I'd observed that it was often propped open during evening meal preparation when staff were busy and distracted. Most importantly, I'd made contact with an unlikely ally. Her name was Rosa Martinez, and she worked the evening housekeeping shift. Rosa was in her 50s, with tired eyes and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. She had 3 children and 2 grandchildren, and she cleaned Sunset Manor's elegant rooms to pay for her youngest son's college tuition. I'd started talking to her during my second week, initially just making conversation while she cleaned my apartment. But Rosa was observant, and she'd seen things that troubled her. "These people, they're not happy," she told me one evening as she dusted my dresser. "They smile when the families visit, but I see them crying when they think no one's looking. It's not right. What happens here?" "What do you mean?" Rosa glanced toward the door, making sure we were alone. "The medications, they give too much. People who come in sharp and clear, after a few months they're like zombies. And the ones who complain," she shook her head, "they disappear into the locked unit. And their families are told they're getting specialized care. Have you ever thought about speaking up?" Her laugh was bitter. "To who? The administration. They'd fire me and hire someone else who keeps quiet. I need this job." "Mrs. Williamson, my family depends on it." I studied her face, seeing the conflict between her conscience and her necessity. "What if someone could help those people without putting your job at risk?" Rosa stopped dusting and looked at me directly. "What are you thinking?" That's when I told her about my plan. Rosa listened without interruption as I explained my situation, my discoveries about Sunset Manor's true nature, and my determination to escape before I became another Walter Kowalski. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You're serious," she said finally, "deadly serious. And you think you can just walk out of here?" "Mrs. Williamson, with respect, you're 81 years old. Where would you go? How would you survive?" I smiled, feeling more alive than I had in weeks. "Rosa, I may be old, but I'm not helpless. I have resources. I have a plan, and most importantly, I have something worth fighting for: my freedom." She studied my face, perhaps seeing something there that reminded her of her own mother or grandmother. "What do you need from me?" "Just a small distraction tomorrow night during dinner service. Nothing that would get you in trouble, just something to draw attention away from the service door for a few minutes. Rosa was quiet again, then nodded slowly. There's been a problem with the industrial dishwasher backing up. Maybe it will malfunction again tomorrow evening. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. I attended my scheduled activities with forced enthusiasm, complimented the bland lunch, and submitted to my afternoon medication check with perfect compliance, except that once again, I palmed the pills and disposed of them later. At dinner, I sat with Margaret Phillips and several other residents, making polite conversation about the weather and the upcoming spring concert. But my attention was focused on the kitchen area, watching the rhythm of meals service, waiting for Rose's signal. At exactly 6:47 p.m., just as dessert was being served, the kitchen erupted in controlled chaos. Water began pouring from under the industrial dishwasher, and Rosa rushed to alert the supervisor. Staff members hurried to contain the flooding, and for about 10 minutes, all attention was focused on the kitchen crisis. I excused myself from dinner, citing fatigue, and returned to my room, moving quickly but quietly. I retrieved my hidden supplies from the art crate: a dark jacket, sturdy walking shoes, my emergency cash, and the small bag I'd packed weeks ago. I changed clothes, pinned my hair under a baseball cap Amy had given me years ago, and took one last look around the apartment that had been my beautiful prison. The hallways were nearly empty. Most residents were still at dinner, and staff were dealing with the kitchen emergency. I made my way to the service area using a route I'd memorized, staying close to walls and avoiding the main camera angles. The service door was exactly where I'd expected it to be, and exactly as I'd observed. Heavy metal with a push-bar release that didn't require a key card from the inside. My heart was pounding as I approached it, expecting alarms, expecting to be stopped at any moment. But the door opened silently, and I stepped out into the soft spring evening. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing deeply. The air smelled different outside the facility, fresher, wilder, full of possibilities rather than disinfectant and institutional food. I could hear traffic in the distance, the sound of real life happening beyond the carefully manicured grounds. Then I started walking. My destination was a bus stop about a mile from Sunset Manor, near a shopping center I'd researched during my planning phase. The walk was harder than I'd anticipated. My legs were shakier than I'd expected, and the small bag felt heavier with each step. But I kept moving, driven by a determination that surprised me with its intensity. At the bus stop, I sat on the bench and waited, looking like any elderly woman heading home from an evening out. When the bus arrived, I paid my fare with exact change and took a seat near the front. Watching through the window as Sunset Manor's lights disappeared behind us, phase 1 of my escape was complete. Now came the really challenging part: building a new life from scratch at 81. The motel room I rented that night was nothing like the elegant accommodations at Sunset Manor. The carpet was stained, the wallpaper was peeling, and the bathroom faucet dripped constantly. But it was mine, chosen by me. Paid for with my own money, free from anyone else's supervision or control. I sat on the sagging bed and used my prepaid phone to call Alina, my lawyer. "Clara, my God, where are you? Marcus has been calling everyone. He says you've disappeared from Sunset Manor, and he's talking about calling the police." "I haven't disappeared, Alina. I've escaped. And before Marcus does anything dramatic, you need to inform him that I'm legally competent, acting of my own free will, and under no obligation to tell him where I am." There was a pause. "Clara, are you sure about this? Marcus is genuinely worried about your safety. Marcus is worried about his own peace of mind. He wants to know that I'm safely tucked away where he doesn't have to think about me anymore. But I'm not ready to be filed away, Aliner. I'm not ready to stop living. Aliner sighed. What do you need from me? Buy me some time. Tell Marcus that you've heard from me, that I'm safe, and that I'll contact him when I'm ready. And remind him that any attempt to have me declared incompetent or to force me to return will result in a very public legal battle that won't reflect well on anyone. And what are you actually planning to do? I looked around the shabby motel room, then out the window at the neon lights of the shopping center across the street. I'm going to live, Aliner. For the first time in months, I'm going to really live. The next morning, I began the practical business of rebuilding my life. Using the yellow pages in the motel lobby, I started calling apartment rental agencies, banks, and social services. My age worked against me in some ways. Landlords were hesitant to rent to an elderly woman without local references. But my cash deposits and Aliner's legal references eventually opened doors. Within a week, I'd found a small studio apartment above a coffee shop in a neighborhood that reminded me of the bohemian districts I'd loved in my younger days. The building was old but well-maintained, with high ceilings and large windows that provided excellent natural light. The owner, a young woman named Sarah who was trying to make a living as a freelance graphic designer, was impressed by my references and my willingness to pay several months' rent in advance. "Are you sure you'll be comfortable here?" she asked, looking around the sparse space. "It's pretty basic. And there's no elevator to the second floor. It's perfect," I assured her. "All I need is space, light, and freedom." Setting up my new life was both exhausting and exhilarating. I bought basic furniture at thrift stores and estate sales, reveling in the ability to choose my own colors and styles after months of beige institutional living. I found an art supply store and spent a wonderful afternoon selecting paints and canvases, discussing techniques with the young clerk who seemed amazed that someone my age was still actively creating art. Most importantly, I began painting again, really painting, not the supervised craft projects of Sunset Manor. I worked on a series inspired by my escape. Bold, abstract pieces in fierce reds and yellows that captured the emotions of breaking free from captivity. But even as I built my new life, I couldn't forget the people I'd left behind. 3 weeks after my escape, I was contacted by an investigative journalist named David Chen, Alice's nephew, who had been trying to get someone to listen to his aunt's complaints about conditions at Sunset Manor. "My aunt told me about you," he said when we met at a coffee shop near my apartment. "She said you were different from the other residents, that you seemed to really see what was happening there." David was in his 30s. With the earnest intensity of someone who'd chosen journalism because he wanted to make a difference. He'd been investigating elder care facilities for a series of articles. But Sunset Manor's reputation and expensive lawyers had made it difficult to get anyone to go on the record with complaints. "I need someone with credibility," he explained. "Someone who was there, who saw the conditions firsthand, but who can't be dismissed as confused or unreliable." I told him everything: the medication regimens designed to keep residents compliant, the isolation from family and friends, the swift punishment of anyone who challenged the system, the way residents' rights were systematically stripped away under the guise of safety and care. David recorded everything, taking careful notes and asking detailed follow-up questions. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "This is worse than I suspected. But Clara, can I call you Clara? You realize that going public with this will bring scrutiny to your own situation. Your son will probably try to use your escape as evidence that you're not competent to make your own decisions." I smiled grimly. "Let him try. I have excellent legal representation, and I think my ability to plan and execute a successful escape from a locked facility demonstrates pretty clearly that my mind is working just fine. Over the next several weeks, David and I worked together to build a comprehensive case against Sunset Manor. He interviewed other family members who'd had concerns about the facility, spoke with former employees who'd quit in disgust, and researched the financial incentives that made warehousing elderly people so profitable. The series of articles was published in the city's alternative weekly newspaper and quickly gained traction on social media. The beautiful prison. How luxury senior living facilities traffic in elder abuse exposed not just Sunset Manor, but an entire industry built on exploiting families' fears and guilt about caring for aging relatives. The response was immediate and dramatic. The state launched an investigation into Sunset Manor's practices. Several families removed their relatives from the facility, and most importantly, residents who had been afraid to speak up found their voices. Alice Chen was one of the first to come forward publicly, her nephew's articles giving her the platform she'd been denied. Dorothy Hartman's family was horrified to learn that her books had been confiscated and demanded her immediate release. Even Walter Kowalski's daughter began questioning the narrative she'd been fed about his deterioration and demanded an independent medical evaluation. But the victory came with a cost. Marcus was furious about my role in the investigation, seeing it as a betrayal of the family and an embarrassment to his professional reputation. Our first conversation after the articles were published was painful and bitter. "Mom, how could you do this to us?" he demanded when he called. "Do you realize what people are saying? That I abandoned my mother. That I was trying to get rid of you. Is that what you were doing, Marcus?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a long moment. "I was trying to keep you safe," he said finally, his voice smaller than before. "Safe from what? From living, from making my own choices, from being who I am instead of who you thought I should become, from being alone, from getting hurt, from dying without anyone knowing." And there it was, the fear that had been driving all of his decisions. Not fear for my well-being, but fear of his own guilt and grief if something happened to me while I was living independently. "Marcus," I said gently, "I'm going to die someday whether I'm in a locked facility or living free. The question is whether I'll die as myself or as someone else's idea of who I should be. I chose myself." The months that followed were some of the most challenging and rewarding of my life. Living independently at 81 required constant adaptation and problem-solving. Simple tasks like grocery shopping became more difficult as my energy waned, and I had to learn to ask for help, something that didn't come naturally to someone who'd spent months fighting for the right to be independent. But I also discovered resources and communities I'd never known existed. The coffee shop downstairs became my morning routine, where I developed friendships with other regulars, young artists, retired teachers, freelance workers who appreciated having a grandmother figure to chat with over their morning caffeine. The community center offered senior programs that were actually designed to empower rather than pacify, where I taught watercolor classes to other older adults who weren't ready to be warehoused. Most surprisingly, I found love again, not romantic love, but the deep friendship that comes from shared experience and mutual respect. Her name was Ruth Martinez, and she was Rosa's mother. Ruth had spent her final years living with her daughter rather than in a facility, and she understood both the challenges and the importance of maintaining independence in old age. She was 79, sharp as a tack, and still volunteering at a literacy program despite arthritis that made writing painful. "You're the lady who broke out of that fancy prison," she said when Rosa introduced us. "Good for you," I told my daughter. "Any place that locks people in isn't a home. It's a jail with better food. Ruth became my closest friend and unofficial advisor on navigating life as an elderly single woman. She taught me about resources for seniors, helped me find doctors who treated their older patients as individuals rather than collections of symptoms, and most importantly, she understood the daily courage required to insist on living life on your own terms when society expects you to gracefully fade away. We spent hours talking about our lives, our regrets, our hopes for whatever time we had left. Ruth had been a seamstress, creating beautiful dresses and alterations for women in her neighborhood. She showed me photographs of her work, elegant gowns, perfect tailoring, artistic details that showed the same kind of creative passion I felt for painting. People think when you get old, that's all you are, old, she said one afternoon as we sat in the small garden behind my apartment building. They forget you were young once, that you had dreams and talents and a whole life full of experiences. They want to put you in a box labeled elderly and forget everything else about you. How do you fight it? I asked. Ruth smiled, her weathered hands still graceful as she gestured. You keep being who you are. You keep doing what you love. You refuse to disappear just because other people are comfortable with your invisibility. The investigation into Sunset Manor eventually led to criminal charges against several administrators and a complete overhaul of the facility's management. Many residents were relocated to more appropriate care settings or returned to their families. The state implemented new oversight procedures for senior living facilities, and several other investigations were launched into similar institutions. But the personal cost of my rebellion continued to reverberate through my family. Linda never forgave me for what she saw as making them look like negligent children who tried to abandon their elderly mother. She made it clear that I was no longer welcome at family gatherings, and she actively discouraged Amy from visiting me. Patricia, my doctor daughter, was more conflicted. Professionally, she understood the medical and ethical issues I'd raised about inappropriate medication and patient autonomy. Personally, she struggled with guilt about her role in pressuring me to move to Sunset Manor. I thought we were doing the right thing, she told me during one of our difficult phone conversations. I thought you'd be happier with people your own age, with activities and care available when you needed it. I know you meant well, I replied, but meaning well doesn't excuse not listening to what I actually wanted. But Mom, what if something happens to you? What if you fall or have a medical emergency or... Then I'll deal with it the same way I've dealt with everything else in my life, as an adult making adult decisions. Patricia, you can't protect me from being mortal. None of us get out of this alive. The only family relationship that grew stronger was my bond with Amy. Now 18 and heading to college, she made it a point to visit me regularly, often bringing friends who were fascinated by her radical grandmother who'd broken out of a nursing home and become an activist. Amy helped me set up a blog where I wrote about aging, independence, and the importance of refusing society's expectations about how elderly people should behave. The blog gained a following among both seniors and their adult children, sparking conversations about autonomy, dignity, and the difference between safety and control. You're famous, Grandma, Amy said one afternoon, scrolling through comments on my latest post. Look, this woman in Oregon says you inspired her to move her father out of a facility he hated. And this guy in Texas says he's going to make sure his mom has more say in her own care decisions. I looked over her shoulder at the screen full of responses from people I'd never met, but who understood the fundamental issue at stake, the right to remain yourself. Even when that self is old and imperfect and inconvenient. I never wanted to be famous, I said. I just wanted to be free. Maybe they're the same thing, Amy replied. being free to be who you really are. As I write this, 2 years have passed since my escape from Sunset Manor. I'm 83 now, and I won't pretend that aging has been easy. My arthritis makes painting more challenging. And I need reading glasses to see the fine details of my work. I walk more slowly, tire more easily, and sometimes forget words that used to come automatically. But I'm still here, still creating, still choosing my own path. My apartment is filled with paintings now, landscapes and portraits and abstract experiments that capture not just images, but emotions. The coffee shop downstairs has agreed to display some of my work. And I've sold several pieces to customers who appreciate art created by someone who refuses to act her age. Ruth and I have become local celebrities of sorts. The 2 elderly women who won't behave the way society expects us to. We speak at community groups about elder rights, mentor younger activists, and most importantly, we continue to live as examples of what's possible when you refuse to accept limitations that others try to impose on you. Marcus and I have slowly begun to rebuild our relationship, though it will never be what it was before. He started to understand that my rebellion wasn't a rejection of his love, but an assertion of my right to receive that love without surrendering my autonomy. Linda remains distant, but Marcus brings Timothy to visit sometimes, and I'm teaching my grandson to paint with the same patience Frank once showed me. The most important thing I've learned is that aging doesn't have to mean disappearing. It doesn't have to mean accepting other people's definitions of who you are or what you're capable of. Every day I wake up in my small apartment, make my own coffee, choose my own clothes, and decide how to spend my time. I'm making a statement about what it means to be fully human at any age. I may not have many years left, but they're going to be my years, lived according to my values and choices. I'll paint until my hands won't hold a brush. I'll speak out until my voice is gone. I'll keep being Clara Williamson, artist, activist, grandmother, rebel, until the very end. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, well, that's their problem, not mine. Because at 83, I've finally learned the most important lesson of all. It's never too late to refuse to fade away. It's never too late to insist on being seen, being heard, being yourself in all your imperfect, inconvenient, beautifully human glory. The girl who once dreamed of flying is still here, still spreading her wings, still believing that anything is possible as long as you're brave enough to try.
Thank you for watching, for listening, and for sharing this time with me. If you enjoyed this journey, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. Until next time, take care, and keep cherishing the chapters of your life.